My name is Alika, and I have the privilege of and honor of being you guys' host for day 2 of the 360 Growth Week. What's up? What's up? If this is your first time really being on here tonight, we do want to say welcome. If you have no idea what you've been invited to, or you're, maybe just trying to get your feet wet to what this whole thing is, this is actually brought to you guys by a Facebook group called the 360 Movement, as well as a podcast hosted by EQs for Entrepreneurs. There's a podcast hosting this as well called EQ for Entrepreneurs. In case you haven't checked out either of those things, I would go check out that Facebook group. You got a request to get into that. It's called the 360 Movement, as well as check out that podcast. It's actually done by Noble and Kathy Gibbons.
So yeah, thank you, Alika. Totally appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. What's up? Welcome, man. So great to have you guys in our crib, in our community, man. This is our family right here. So super stoked to have you guys. Welcome to the family. And everyone I know will make you guys feel welcome if you're visiting, if this is your first time or second time into the 360 Movement Personal Growth Tribe. Okay, so I'm super stoked, y'all, to introduce, Drew Steadman. So we go way back. So this, boom, look at that. And that is actually he and his wife in the White House. And you're only seeing part of his shoulder there. When you're the military aide, he's got fancy stuff all over the place. So, when you are working with and for the most powerful dude on the planet, right? You get like certain fancy pants outfits and stuff. But Drew has already an infantry battalion commander. He already got identified as the brigade commander for Fort Carson. So he'll pin on his 06, his full bird colonel. For those of you all that love learning, I'm a passionate learner. I love learning. And Drew is one of those kindred spirits because, there's a verse in the Bible. I'm not trying to preach to anybody, but there's a verse that says Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron. So one man sharpens another. And I learned so much from Drew. He has been a leadership student of leadership for, like I have been for, probably 2 decades plus. And, he's got the Military Leader podcast. If you haven't checked that out, he is just a super dude. Super excited to have him share with you guys tonight, share with us tonight. And I can't wait to learn from you. So without further ado, Big Drew, let's give it up. Raise the roof, Big Drew. What?
No, well, thank you for that overwhelming introduction. I am humbled and excited just to be a part of this group. And like you said, like-minded people who are just committed to getting better every single day for themselves, for the people around them, and then for the world. Like that's an awesome path. And what I appreciate about you and Kathy is that you set the example for that, and you instill the habits in others that will go on to help us, achieve bigger and better things. So I want to thank you just from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity and for just being a longtime friend and mentor. I appreciate that. And what I grew, I just scrolled through all the faces there in the gallery, man. I'm like, wow, there's some great people here, and lots of people that I need to get to know. I'm just, it's really cool to be part of this. So let me cut right to the chase and tell you a story, if that's okay. I'm going to talk about leading in times of crisis, and this really flows in with what we're facing right now. We are in an unprecedented time, and at a time where we're yanked out of normal and completely out of our comfort zone and into situations that none of us could have predicted. But I challenge you to ask whether or not you could predict what is coming. Even from right now, what situations should we be envisioning that we will have to lead through? And so just put that away for a second while I tell you a story. And it comes from, as Noble mentioned, I was extremely fortunate to be able to work in the White House for the last 2 years of President Obama's presidency. And I had a team, there was a team of 5 military aides to the president, majors and lieutenant colonels. And we traveled with the president everywhere. We carried the football. We were in charge of, all the emergency action stuff. If bad stuff happened, we were in charge of that. And so our job was to think about bad days. Like what could go wrong here? So we had an evolving crisis scenario play out, just like you would imagine Secret Service would. We had a similar thing. And so it almost became our job to develop contingencies. And so we developed a mind for contingency planning. And maybe that's kind of one thing you maybe jot down on the side there, but it's this mind that gets you out of the comfort that you're in and yanks you into somewhere where you will definitely be uncomfortable. And how can you predict that? And so, my story is in the first 2 months that I was there, I was onboarded into the job, and my first trip was to India. So I got my pass, my badge, I got read on to all the top secret stuff, and we flew from Newark to New Delhi, and at the time it was about 3 days ahead of when the president was going to arrive, and so our job was to set up the site and get everything ready for his visit. Well, the King of Saudi Arabia had just passed away, and this was 2015. This was January 2015. The King of Saudi Arabia had passed away, and there was thought that the president might fly to Saudi Arabia to go for the memorial. They were already buried him, but they were going to do a big memorial thing. There was that thought, but most of the people said, no, the vice president's going to go do it. And so what that meant, assuming that the vice president was going to go to Saudi Arabia, meant that the president's itinerary would stay the same. So in India, the itinerary would not change. Everything's good. Well, a crisis-minded person would think, well, what if that didn't happen? What if the president all of a sudden decided to go to Saudi Arabia and change his itinerary? What eventualities could occur? And so if I'd have been ahead of my game, I would have thought, okay, how are we going to have to react to this? What are the different courses of action we could develop? What would we do if he's all of a sudden changed an overseas trip on the fly? Like, how would we respond to that? But I didn't. I didn't think about that, and so we got into New Delhi at like 2 a.m. I got to the hotel at 4 and went to bed, and I did not do any contingency planning, and so. I got woken up to a phone call at 6, and they said, guess what? The president has changed his mind. Your leg of the trip is canceled, and you need to get to Saudi Arabia in less than 24 hours so that you can receive the president there. Mind exploded, right? Like, this is bad news. And so had I been on my game, I would have spent the entire 14-hour plane ride plus those 3 hours there on the ground planning for that and moving everything. So instead, we had to zip on down to where the Agra, India, where the president was going to go, which is where the Taj Mahal is. He was going to go visit the Taj Mahal. And gather the team there, which is about 250 people. Secret Service, we had Army Special Forces, we had communications, we had medical, we had logistics, we had all different types, Air Force One, Marine One, all these people there, about 250 of them, and said, guess what, we're moving. And so now we had to plan how to get there using all the resources at our disposal. And so the weather became a problem. And so bottom line, we had to drive about 8 hours overland on buses and trucks and pack up everything to get there just in time to get picked up by C-17 and flown to Saudi Arabia to start a whole new day for the arrival for the president. And so we barely got through it. I'll just tell you that with a fewer hours notice, we would not have gotten through it. So what did I learn from that? I learned to ask myself 5 questions that would help me if that crisis arose. And the questions are this. Number 1, what am I assuming that might not be true or may change later? What am I assuming that might not be true or may change later? Now, fast forward to right now. Right now, we're assuming the grocery stores are going to continue to be open. Is that a safe assumption? For right now it is, but who knows where the course of this pandemic is going to go. So what if that happened? What if my local grocer shut down? What if my doctor shut down his or her business, right? So what am I assuming? What am I relying on that might not be true or may change later on? And so number 2, it's really, if there are any, anybody's been in the military, like the red teaming, the military intelligence officers out there, it's their job to think about the enemy, right? And what the enemy can do to you. So this is a form of red teaming. So number 2 question, what other courses of action could emerge? So What if the president decides to come down? Okay, then what could we do? We could pull a team from the States and fly them over. They would take too long. They could fly us there. They could cancel the entire India trip. So you start coming up with branch plans that will help you envision this world that you might have to lead through. So what am I assuming that might change? What other courses of action could emerge? Number 3, how much time would I have to react to a new course of action? And so this gets into your decision window and how much time. So if you've got 2 weeks to decide, then maybe you've got some time to flesh this out, get some other inputs. But if you've got 2 hours to decide, then that changes your priorities. You're like, okay, what must I know right now? What information must I have right away? Could I start to warm start some of that information to say, hey, just in case we had to send an air diverter C-17 to India, where would they land? What are the weather patterns where we could get out and make this thing happen? So you start to warm start some of that. So what am I assuming that might change? What other courses of action could emerge? Number 3, how much time would I have to react? Number 4, what assets do I need in place to adequately respond? And this could be anything from moving assets in your business. Maybe you're moving money around. Maybe it's as simple as downloading your contacts and printing out all the phone numbers that you might need in case something disastrous happens, right? Like, we just had tornadoes in the South. What if tornado knocks out power and you need to call a doctor because all of a sudden your kid has got a dry cough and a fever? Do you know the doctor's number off the top of your head or written down? So, I mean, that's kind of one course of action that you might need to respond to. So what assets do I need in place? And then finally, who else needs to ask and answer these questions? So you've done it for you and your kind of personal leadership space. But when the crisis comes, who are you in charge of? Do bosses need to make preemptive decisions so that you can better do your job? Does your team need information and need to be thinking about this? And so, what are you assuming? What courses of action could emerge? How much time do you need to make a decision? What assets need in place? And who else could you talk to about this to get it? And this is all kind of a package of contingency planning that helps you in case stuff starts to hit the fan. Now, what I'll encourage you to do is to resource your team like they are as smart as you are. You are not the only person that can solve these problems. And so, just speaking from a military, hierarchy here, I'm going to go in. I'm very fortunate to be able to go into brigade command in the summer of 21. And so I plan on, when we have a mission, we have planned doing a planning session. I plan on involving every rank that's on the brigade staff for, a brainstorming session and kind of an idea session to gin up some of the things to make to make the operation that much better, So anyway, so that is kind of a blast. Say hi to everybody.
Hey.
Hey, everybody, you just witnessed the homeschool dad life right there, baby.
Yeah. So that is kind of the crux of it there. We are locked in this rut of thinking and logic and comfort, and to lead through crisis, to be ready for that, you have to envision possibilities and break out of that mindset where you are. You have to step out of your own perspective. And finally, whose job it is, it's the leader's job. The leader, like I think it was Max Dupree said, the leader defines reality for the team. And so defines what that landscape is. And so if the leader can envision a landscape that is not the norm that they might have to get through, then it can help the team better prepare for it. So I will stop there and see if we have any discussion or question. I would love to engage.
Okay, so I do, and I've seen this in the military. I've seen it in the corporate sector. I've seen it in entrepreneurship. I see it all the time. And me included, what big was it, Paul? Of all the sinners, I am the biggest or the worst, or whatever. How do we, as leaders, as influencers, as entrepreneurs, how do we get good at breaking or getting out of our cognitive biases? Have you found any tools or systems to help either yourself or other leaders get out of those mental ruts that we get in?
Yeah, the one word answer that immediately comes to mind is inspired by Michael Bungay Stanier, who I was very fortunate to interview for the podcast not but a couple months ago, and he wrote a book called The Coaching Habit and the Advice Trap. He just finished a TEDx talk, and he says to lead with curiosity. And so for me, the thing that breaks me out of my own bias, and this is just me talking, is that curiosity factor. Because and the Advice Trap is such a crucial book, because he says when you start having a conversation, we immediately jump to, especially if you're in a position of authority talking to a follower or a subordinate, we jump to an answer. And I got this, business deal that's not going right, or I got, this problem with this, this leader. We start going through answers. What can I do to help solve this problem? And that's where the biases start before they've even finished the question, right? But finish their problem. We're ready to lay down advice. And so Michael Bungay Stanier says, if we can listen just a little bit longer, and if we can speak just a little bit more slowly, we'll become more coach-like. And it's brilliant. I mean, I was so excited to interview him on the podcast. It was 2 episodes. It was right after I talked with you, and right after we put that episode. So Michael Bungay Stanier, The Coaching Habit is his book. But curiosity can break down a lot of cognitive walls, at least for me.
That's excellent, Drew. Excellent point there. The other thing I wanted to say is that, again, please share with your audiences some of your takeaways from Drew on your social media platforms tonight, tomorrow, something like that. That would be super awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you guys. Absolutely.
Real quick, Drew. So what episode on your podcast was it that you were just referencing?
I have got it right here. And it's episode 5.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. Here's a question. Moses and Kara, good question. How do you minimize the emotions, the anxiety, the worry that comes with the what if mindset, right? Because once you start imagining what if, there can be a whole flood of emotions that come with it. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, listen, you're talking about something, and if Emily were here, she'd be looking at me like, you don't do this enough, because she is brilliant at thinking ahead to, okay, when we're 6 hours into the visit to Universal Studios, we're going to need X, Y, and Z for the kids, right? Like my mind doesn't always go down that road. All right. So I appreciate, her doing that, but that's right. Like if you worry about those things ahead of time, it gives you negative emotions twice, right? Not only in the anticipation, but also maybe when you experience it. That's a great question. I think a primer ahead of time, and that it's a developmental option, or like some way to formalize or some way to capture the aspects of that environment. So, okay, we're going to write down, we're going to limit it to 5 things about this crisis environment that we need to consider. And then we're going to say 5 things that'll disrupt us, and then maybe 5 advantages. And so maybe you spread it out kind of logically, and that'll take some of the emotion out of that what ifing. I think that's my first take on it. But we're doing this here, Kathy. Like I'm on Fort Irwin right now in Southern California, and thankfully we're fairly isolated. We live in the largest cul-de-sac in the Army. It's 35 miles of straight road, followed by a little circle of Fort Irwin. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that if all the commissary workers get infected and can't come to work, somebody's got to run the commissary. And so that can be stressful. We got to teach soldiers how to run the commissary. And so that's a skill set that we have to accept that it could happen. And so that's just one of the things, but that stressing caused, hey, let's go teach the skill so we can figure out if it comes,
Okay. So this is great.
Last question here that we have for you, Drew. So do you think that seeing every possible issue, Elijah, great question again, comes naturally from a logic or experience? Or how can this be learned? You said you're having to train soldiers, right? You said you're having to do this. So can this be learned? And if so, how does a person learn to think this way?
Yeah, there's a phrase in the Army, and some of the audience might have heard it, but there's only 2 ways to learn in the Army: from mindless repetition or blunt force trauma. And it seems that the blunt force trauma has inculcated those lessons deeper than the mindless repetition. That was a wake-up call when I went through this scenario and we almost didn't make the mission. And so, but it has been, it's almost been a literal reminder when sinking into a new mission or some situation as an opening trigger, right? So maybe number 1 is, identify the key players, get to know the people immediately, right? And then, number 2, identify the systems and the resources. And then 3, keep an open mind about what could happen or what environment you might find yourself in. So I've made it part of my, again, blunt force trauma. I mean, hard lessons over and over, but I made it part of my my own battle rhythm to think about these things and to almost not be the dissenting voice, because people don't necessarily gravitate to those who dissent with pride. Well, yeah, I'm the disruptor and I'm going to be the antagonist here. No, you want to do it with an intellectual curiosity because everyone's kind of working toward the same mission. So I've tried to use that as an identity that I try to take on as that kind of contingency planner. So good question though.
That's great, Drew. This whole thing makes me think of, just your whole talk makes me think of something that I've addressed a little bit in our podcast, EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast, because this all ties into mental agility and leadership agility, and the important, and especially for all of you entrepreneurs out there, the importance, and I would almost say the necessity as an entrepreneur to be and or become mentally and emotionally agile. And that comes from my perspective, it comes from being more emotionally mature. The more, in my opinion, the more emotionally mature someone is, the more capacity you have to become more mentally agile. And as an entrepreneur, where no 2 days are the same, and where one day you're learning how to do marketing, the next day you're learning how to do sales, the next day you're learning how to do operations, the next day, right, because you've got the 15 hats that every entrepreneur wears as a startup guy, this is a critically important lesson, Drew. So I totally appreciate, again,
100%.
you sharing and stuff. Drew, thank you so much for your time, brother. We totally appreciate it.
You.